Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. It is time to rejoice. Gone are the days of the temperatures at freezing. We could put these shovels away. Maybe not the parkers and bubble coats just yet, but spring is officially here today. Which means warm days are coming, and so is the latest podcast delivering all the flowers, blue skies, and birds chirping over the next hour or so, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that spring is officially here, we can now look forward to what I would think would be a wild stretch of sports from now until, let's say, the first week of July. Because even though sports will pretty much be capped off once we get to the end of June, despite the fact that baseball will be in full bloom, but with the NBA and Stanley Cup Finals will be concluding at the end of June, and therefore after the free agency period from July 1st to let's say the 7th, in basketball and hockey, now we have this long stretch. And even though it's a little bit quiet now, despite the fact that the madness will begin in about, from the time I'm recording this, I would say 2.5 hours. So for everybody that has their brackets filled out, for everybody that is hoping for their alma mater to get to a point where they could reach a Final Four and maybe even win a national championship, or for those who are just playing around, seeing if they could just fill out their brackets and press their luck to maybe win some money, these next 4 days in particular. Now, once we get past this in the Sweet 16, obviously it will slow down, although it'll ratchet up next Thursday, Friday, and so on. But today, tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday are probably the most frenetic 4 days that the sports world will ever see. Only because you have 48 basketball games starting from about 12:15, 12:20 today, going up until about midnight come Monday morning. So think about that. You will have wall-to-wall college basketball here, and everybody's going to be geeked up and I'm sure glued to their monitors, whether it be a laptop or desktop. Who knows if they're going to have it playing in the background while they're working remotely, or if they are in the office, you know that one eye is going to be on work and the other eye is going to be on the tournament. So now let's all bring it together and deliver it to you here on a silver platter as we get set for the madness to begin. And I'll start off with what took place here over the past 2 days. And obviously North Carolina being the big story. We talked about them on Monday, how they did not deserve to be in the tournament and all the controversy surrounding that. But we could talk about whether or not by them destroying San Diego State, whether or not that they still earned the right to be in the Final 64. Now, obviously they earned it by beating the Aztecs there on Tuesday night, but they still didn't deserve to be a part of the first four. And I understand we could talk about that till we're blue in the face. And although this win, and a resounding one at that, doesn't justify them being here, but now that they are here and they're going to go up against Ole Miss tomorrow, which gives them an extra day. So it's not as if they played Tuesday night and they're going to play today at some point, whether it be at 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, or even the first game today. That is not the case. They still have another 24 plus hours to kind of let it marinate, to soak in that they are here, that they, I don't want to say shock the world because they are North Carolina, but they did shut up the naysayers. They did silence the critics, including yours truly, for at least a few days to get to this point to where maybe they could continue this run and get to a point where, could they even get to a Sweet 16? Now, mind you, when we look at their region, it is one that, considering that they're going to play Ole Miss, and with Ole Miss, a team that coming out of the SEC, as we know, and they've had just a stellar year with 14 teams coming out of that conference. But when we take a look at North Carolina, it's not as if they have a gauntlet to get to a Sweet 16, despite the fact that they could end up playing Iowa State, who has had a very big year, as you know. But stranger things have happened in this tournament. Could you imagine that Lipscomb, where even yours truly couldn't pick them out of a map or a lineup to know where or in what state that they play in? But like I said, you had these matchups, whether it's more or less the 5-12 historically, but you have had 2 15s and 3 14s go ahead and just blow up brackets from here to Timbuktu, but if North Carolina, who knows, maybe the college basketball gods that's shown on them to get to this point, maybe they'll have Lipscomb shock the world and have it to where they'll play on Sunday afternoon, and next thing you know, we'll be here on Monday where North Carolina will be in the Sweet 16. Do I think that's going to happen? I don't think so, although I do think that they're going to beat Ole Miss, only because they have gas in their tank. Once again, they've silenced the critics, and even though I'm sure that the running Rebels, they're going to say, hey, wait, now that this team has wind in their sails, we have to do whatever it takes to put the proverbial foot on their necks, to not have any air, for them to just not be in the game, even if they get out to a big lead early on, to not let them creep back in, because as we all know, when you let a team hang around, even if it's a scenario where both teams, not to say that they're even, but even in a scenario where it's 6-11 or even if it's an 8-9, you do not want to have any breathing room for these teams where you know that you could deliver that knockout punch. So for Carolina, I think they'll win tomorrow, but I don't know if they're going to get past that. Now, if they play Lipscomb, of course, that's going to be a toss-up. And you would think that North Carolina is going to be favored and probably advance to a Sweet 16. But if we would go by what we would see here, and knowing that Iowa State, who has had a big season, and you would think that they're going to end up beating Lipscomb to go up head-to-head against North Carolina, chances are we would think that Iowa State's going to win. Now, again, we cannot determine into our crystal balls on whether or not, oh yeah, North Carolina's not going to make it to the Sweet 16, or this team's not going to go far, or that seed, number one, is going to get knocked off here before they even get to a regional final. If that's the case, then why even watch the games? But I would think North Carolina, with them now being here, I think that they'll make some noise here in this first game. And if they do end up playing Iowa State, do I see them possibly beating them? I have to give them a shot and a puncher's chance for them to get to a Sweet 16. But I would think at that point, Iowa State will, you would think, dispose of Lipscomb, and then it will be a situation where they know that they could take care of North Carolina, and as I mentioned, not give them any breathing room, get them to a point where they're going to have to come from behind and maybe get some heroics by R.J. Davis, who had the great game there the other night against San Diego State, had the 6 3-pointers, 6 for 6, and the big game where they just blew the doors off of San Diego State. But I'm only going to start there, and I understand we can talk about Xavier in Texas, where Xavier came from behind to beat the Longhorns, and the Longhorns, again, just shows that when they get into the tournament, even if it is the first four, for whatever the reason, they do not seem to show up when you actually think that they're going to show up and play well and maybe get to a point where they could go on and run themselves. So that was not the case. And Xavier, a team from the Big East now, could go along with the Marquettes, with St. John's, with UConn as another team from that conference that are part of the Final 64. And then you have Mount St. Mary's winning, beating American, and then you also had a scenario where Alabama State won at the buzzer on one of those baseball Hail Mary passes, which was reminiscent of Duke, Kentucky many moons ago. Obviously not the same outcome when it comes to a regional final as opposed to a first four, but you get where I'm coming from if you did watch or at least saw the highlight there of Alabama State winning their game. So now here it is. We're all set, ready to go for today. And I'm going to attack it this way. I'm going to start with the top storylines, to me, that I'm looking at here in this tournament, or at least in this opening weekend, because once you get past that, who knows what's going to be left as far as the final 16 teams are concerned. But when we take a look at it, Monday, if you recall, one of the storylines I talked about was from hardest to least hardest was the West, South, Midwest, and East regions. East being Duke, who I think have a cakewalk to get to a Final Four, and more on that in a little bit. But for the other regions, I think that with Florida, St. John's, you also have a scenario where you have Arkansas, Kansas. Obviously, you may have a matchup with Calipari and Patino here in the next round, which would be on Sunday for both of those teams. And then, it would be on Saturday. And then you also have Maryland, who's played very well this year, Memphis, who won a conference title, and everybody's rallying around Penny Hardaway, the head coach there, to see if they can have some legs and go on a run. And then, of course, you have UConn, which could end up playing Florida in the next round. And, of course, we know UConn is the two-time defending champ. Not to say that they may have any length in this tournament, considering what Florida, with their size and their shooting and physicality, we would think that Florida is going to be a team that will make it to San Antonio as part of the Final Four. But that is a tough region, considering you have all those teams and a lot of pedigree there coming out of that bracket. And then in the South, we have Auburn, who has not played well here, down the stretch, losing 3 or 4. And now, with them being the number 1 seed overall, they are going to be a target to see whether or not in that bracket where you have Louisville and Creighton, another Big East team that I didn't mention. But for Auburn, are they going to be a team that has stumbled into the tournament despite the fact that they're big season and go on a run to get to a Final Four? To me, that's also a top storyline. And when we take a look at the number 1s, which is going to be 1A, but when I look at this region, whether it be Michigan State, where a lot of people are going to look at Tom Izzo, the 25th anniversary of their national championship, and knowing that he has a team that is built and could go on a long run. Now, they don't have the one big megastar on their team, but they are deep. They have 10 players that Izzo will shuffle in and out and certainly could be a threat to get to not only a regional final, but to get to the Final Four. And then when you look at the Midwest with Houston and Tennessee, now both of those teams, a lot of people think that they're going to meet for a regional final, and they're both defensive oriented. Tennessee may have a little bit more scoring, although Houston can score, but when the game gets slowed down, they want to play a street fight. They want to suffocate. They want to be physical. They want to play defense. And Tennessee plays in that fashion as well. But I think a lot of people may look at Tennessee coming out of here, even though Houston has pretty much been a number 1 seed throughout the whole year. Now, not number 1 overall as far as in the regular season, but a team that is certainly worthy of another number 1 ranking, especially coming out of the Midwest. But even in that bracket with Kentucky, not a vintage Kentucky team based on their record this year. Think about it. They're 22-11. So even though they're a 3 seed, and you can understand why, based on what they've done now, minus, of course, John Calipari, who, as we all know, is in Arkansas. But a lot of people think that maybe whether it's them, even a team like Purdue coming off of a final appearance there last year, as we know, and then even a situation where Illinois, as I talked about, where now they're going to play Xavier, which would be an interesting game. Illinois is the type of team where they could blow teams out by 20, but then they also get blown out by 20. So that's also a very unpredictable bracket. UCLA, not a vintage Bruin team as we know. Clemson, I know, could be on the come up. Gonzaga could be a team that a lot of people over the years, whether they be a 1 seed and a team that a lot of people thought would win a championship, despite the fact that they did get to a final there a few years ago, but still did not seal the deal under Coach Mark Few. But maybe they can make some noise and maybe not even get Houston to a Sweet 16, considering that Gonzaga under the radar. And when you look at a team like that, it's under the radar. You're not expecting them to do big things, but they go up against Georgia, who, again, out of that crowded and just log jam of an SEC, a very interesting first game, which will be later today. And then the East. Now, I always thought that maybe St. John's would have been part of the East, which would have made this bracket a lot more intriguing as opposed to St. John's having to play out west in the Florida bracket. But for Duke, when you look at it overall, all right, you can look at Alabama. Yes, they could score and certainly could give Duke a run for their money, but can you really depend on them, especially with Cooper Flagg? Maybe not 100%, but from the same standpoint, Duke is due. Duke has not won a national title in quite some time. They actually haven't had a deep run, even to a Final Four, and it seems like forever. So I would think Duke may be primed here to get to a Final Four, considering when you look at their region, whether it's Wisconsin. All right, Wisconsin got a 3 seed, although they lost in the Big Ten championship to Michigan, and you could argue whether or not Michigan could have got a higher seed, where Wisconsin could have maybe been a 5, where Michigan is a 5 now, where they play UC San Diego in the South region. But for Wisconsin, or even a team like BYU, where I think, and I'll give you a little clue here, I think with their shooting and the way that they can just shoot the lights out of the ball, now they kind of remind me of the Celtics, because they live and die by the 3. If the 3 is being knocked down, then they're going to be an unstoppable team. But if they shoot 15 for 35 and things are looking great, but they can turn that around and maybe shoot 6 for 40, and then they'll shoot themselves out of a game. But BYU is a dangerous team, and it's also a little bit of a darling here, because when we take a look at these brackets and regions, I don't think there's a lot of teams that are going to have length. Now, maybe we could see North Carolina as an 11 seed. Who knows? Does Xavier have something in them? I don't think so. But I like BYU as a dark horse here, and I'm tipping my hand here when it comes to my Final Four, so just keep that in mind. Arizona, another team, Oregon, those are teams that are in that region that people may think that they could be successful and go on a deep run, maybe to a regional final, or dare I even say a Final Four. But to me, this is going to be, I think, a cakewalk for Duke. And now as I take a look at the other storyline, which is 1A, this could be the first time since 2008 where you may have all 4 1 seeds meet up in a Final Four. And if you recall, that was the year that Memphis played Kansas in the final, where Memphis actually had a great chance, and that was John Calipari, if you remember, under Derrick Rose. And for the Tigers, who had a great run with Rose, and then on top of that, they actually had, an 8-point lead with about 2.5 minutes to go before Chalmers made that great shot and sent it into overtime, and then that's when the Jayhawks won their championship. But with UCLA and North Carolina, those are all 1 seeds that made it to the tournament that year. And it just so happened to be in San Antonio, which is, of course, where the Final Four is going to be this year. Do I think we're going to see all 4 1s make it there? Now, it's easy to think that, considering the type of year that Duke, Auburn, Houston, and Florida has had, but you know there's going to be one team that's going to throw a wrench into this whole system, and therefore you're going to have a scenario where you could be left for, let's say, a BYU, or maybe even Michigan, or even a Michigan State. And that's also is the second thing here, is that you have a lot of top-heavy teams in this tournament, where the 1s and 2 seeds, they could make it to a final just as much as the 1 seeds. So you can have St. John's, you can have Tennessee, you can have Michigan State, and you can also have Alabama represent as almost 1As to the 1 seeds here in this tournament, because based on a lot of these predictions and the way that these people have filled out their brackets, whether it be the celebrities or the prognosticators like yours truly, a lot of them picked either chalk, all 1 seeds, or they picked 3 1 seeds and a 2, or 2 1 seeds and 2 2s. I mean, what fun is that? You want to be a little bit different. You want it to be a situation where you want to be fair, but at the same time, you just don't want to say, all right, I got all the 1 seeds making it to a Final Four. Granted, this could be the 1 year where you may get that, and I understand, but that's almost like saying at the beginning of the year here in baseball, where we'll have the preview next week. And by the way, I'm going to have just to digress for a second, my baseball preview is going to be extra special this year. So you're going to have to wait toward the end of the podcast, or at least when I talk about the baseball segment, as to how that's going to be presented to you. So you definitely want to stand by for that. But that's like me coming out saying my World Series prediction, which is not, is Yankees-Dodgers. So it's easy for me to come out and say that right now because that's the chalk. And as much as it's a situation or even a thought where a lot of people may not look at this tournament and say, I can't see the 6th seed in this region, or I can't see a double-digit seed in that region, or you know what, yes, maybe the 4 seed Texas A&M in the South, maybe they'll have a run in them and get to a Final Four. Now you could pick that, and that would certainly be fine because it's a little bit different. But because it is so top-heavy with these 1 and 2 seeds, and I understand they're ranked there for a reason, we can't just look at it as a weak 2 seed, whether it's Tennessee or whether it's even Alabama. Those teams are deserving of where they were slotted here by the selection committee. But at the same time, it is rather I don't want to go as far as saying a foregone conclusion, but it is rather a coincidence that these teams, as strong as they've been throughout the course of the year, they could be in line for a deep run here to where they will probably get to a Final Four, and anything below those 2 seeds would be, not say shocking, but would be surprising. Because that's the way the tournament is shaping up here, because in years past, and even recent years, where it was just unpredictable, that even the 4 1 seeds, that I can't see them getting far because that region was too strong, or because that region is loaded with teams that certainly are deserving to get to a Final Four. Just look 2 years ago, where you had a 4 seed, a 5 seed, an 8 seed, and a 9 seed with Florida, International, Miami, San Diego State, and UConn. they all made it to a Final Four, and the 1 seeds were nowhere to be found. So, to me, this is a year where it could probably flip-flop, where you're going to have a lot of top-heavy seeds make it to a Final Four. So that's how I'm looking at the storylines there when it comes to just the big picture. Now, as far as which 1 seed I think will be out before, or the first team out, something tells me that Houston may not have a lot of length in this tournament. And that's not a knock on them. Watch, I threw the jinx, watch them get to a Final Four. But because Houston is a team that will want to play in a phone booth, physical, defensive-oriented, and they could have trouble scoring at times, similar to St. John's in that regard. But for Houston, I think that they could be the first team knocked out here as far as the 1 seeds. And if there's a second team that I would probably add after that, I can't say Duke. I won't even say Florida. So if that's going to be the case, I have to look at Auburn based on how they did not play well down the stretch. And even though watch them turn it on and get to a Final Four, but if I'm looking at the pecking order of which team could get picked off here early, I got to say Houston 1 and I got to say Auburn 2. As far as Florida Duke, I could see them going on deep runs. I could see them getting to Final Fours. And if I had to guess, maybe Duke would be the third team that could get picked off. And then Florida last if either of those teams don't make it to a Final Four and obviously win the whole thing. And of course, a team could get picked off in a Final Four if they're playing a big-time underdog. But if Florida, let's just say for argument's sake, if Florida gets to a Final Four and they play Auburn and Auburn beats them, they're not getting picked off. I mean, those are 2 1 seeds. Those are 2 teams that obviously have been powerhouses throughout the course of the regular season. And now, to me, it's not a scenario where, that's a big upset if Auburn were to beat Florida. Remember, Auburn is still the number 1 seed overall in this tournament. So that's how I'm going to look at with the 1 seeds. And then also on top of that, which I found interesting, was Rick Pitino in his press conference yesterday. And maybe this is a 2 or maybe even a 3 for that matter, because I know I'm kind of all over the map here with the storylines. But to me, with Pitino, he was talking about he's nearing the end. Now, he doesn't know, by the grace of God, he says he may have 2 more years left, 3 more years left, 4 more years left. The guy's a coach. And as we've seen, he's coached everywhere, whether it be Boston University, Providence, Kentucky, Louisville, Iona, St. John's. I mean, the guy's been everywhere. And despite the fact that he's also had controversy surrounding him in certain programs, as you know, and not only also even in his personal life on top of that, the guy is still here as one of the best, if not the best coach standing here in this tournament. And now that he has St. John's, a team that he's put back on the map for the first time, let's call it as we see it, in 40 years, because even though they did win the Big East tournament in 2000, and even though they have really hit rock bottom here over the first quarter century of this, now of the 2000s, and now it's a situation where he can have this team go deep, get to a regional final, and hopefully doesn't see Florida standing in its way. But with St. John's and with the 40th anniversary of Lou Carnesecca, who just passed away in November, and how the Redmen at the time, now of course Red Storm, how they got to a Final Four before losing to Georgetown in the semifinal. Could this be a situation where the basketball gods, including Lou Carnesecca from the heavens above, will kind of sprinkle some magic dust there for the Red Storm to go on that deep run, to maybe even bring, whether it be this year or next, but you got to take it 1 year at a time with Pitino, as he is 72 years of age. But I thought it was fascinating for him to say that he's nearing the end, and who knows when that could be. Now, dare I even say they get to a Final Four and win the whole thing? At that point, he should just go off into the sunset. Because what else has he left to prove? We know he's won championships at Louisville. He won a championship at Kentucky. He's made it to a Final Four in Providence once upon a time. And the guy has just been one of the best coaches in college basketball that we've ever seen. But I'm getting ahead of myself by already crowning them national champions, which would go great, and it's music to my friend John's ears, who's the biggest St. John's fan that I know, dear friend of mine that I've known for almost 40 years. In fact, it'll be 40 years this year. But I thought that was intriguing to hear Pitino just have a moment of reflection, to know that, yes, the end is coming, that even though he's a guy that probably still has a few more years left in the bank, and even in the tank for that matter, but who knows, with transfer portals and with college basketball being so transient with personnel and coaches, as we've already seen here over the last couple of days, I'm sure his college basketball mortality was certainly brought to the forefront here and had to bring it out to light to the media. And obviously we got a chance to digest that here over the last day or so. Now, as I take a look at these brackets, and I'll give you my final four here, and I'll start with the West. No, I'll start with the East. I'll go, to me, easiest and then hardest. Now, I'm not going to go through every game, people. It's going to take forever here. The podcast will be an hour and a half just on the college basketball alone. But as much as Duke, Cooper Flagg, we know about his talent, what the team has done this year. Now, I can't pick them, people. I'm sorry. I know Duke is due, though. Even with the year that they had Zion, and a lot of people thought that Zion Williamson, was going to deliver Duke a national championship or at least a Final Four appearance, and obviously it did not do that. I think they made it into the regional semis. And for John Shire, the coach, knowing that he's trying to build his program his way, obviously with Coach K departing a few years ago, and now that he has this player who a lot of people think is going to be the next big thing in the NBA, and I'm sure Victor Wembanyama will have a thing or two to say about that, but considering that he is born on this soil and is a guy that could be the future of the NBA, but it's a matter of him doing it right now. And even with that ankle injury, I don't know what the status is of him. I'm sure he's going to play a little bit there tomorrow afternoon, but at the same time, is it going to be one of those injuries that, based on his style of play, is he going to re-aggravate it rather quickly? Is it going to be a situation where it's just going to nag throughout the course of this first round, second round, and as far as they go? And that's going to be huge for Duke because he is going to be obviously the big piece of this puzzle on them getting to a Final Four and winning the whole thing. But as far as the team that I see coming out of here, I could see Alabama coming out. Like I talked about, they can score, and Alabama has been to a Final Four, as you know. But how I look at this overall, I don't believe in Wisconsin. Arizona, yeah, maybe they can do something here. But I'm going to take BYU because out of all the regions, this is the one region that I'm picking a team that's not out of the top two. And I understand that, oh, come on, JAYREELZ, here you are talking about not going chalk or not taking. Well, you know what? This is based on what I see and what I've researched, gathered, and watched, etc. So BYU with their shooters and with the way that I look at, and VCU, listen, they're a team that knows their way around the tournament historically. And I understand it was a long time ago that they went to a Final Four. And yes, we could break down how much VCU is not that same team that they once were when they were under the helm of Shaka Smart, the head coach at the time of Virginia Commonwealth. But all I could say is this is a team that I feel like, although the radar is on them in the spotlight, because I'm not the only one that's touted BYU as a team that could go on a long run, but with Richie Saunders, a guy who is obviously a big scorer and a leader of this team, and for them, and of course they do have an injury to one of their key players that also could be pivotal here, as we know. But I don't know. I like BYU here. I'm going to pick them to go to a Final Four. I cannot take Duke only because of my disdain for their organization or for their university, etc. So out of the East, I'm picking them, and I know it's going to be tough because if BYU is going to play Duke in a final and it's going to be in Newark, it is almost going to be a home game for the Duke Blue Devils. So that will have to wait and see, or who knows, maybe they get picked off early because Duke has not had a run to a Final Four in quite some time. So that's region number one. Number two in the Midwest, I'm not going to pick Houston. Like I said, I think they're going to get picked off early. Gonzaga, I can see them going far only if they get past Houston. I think they'll beat Georgia. And can they beat Houston? I think they can. I don't know if they will, though. But the other teams in this region, I'm not a believer in Kentucky. I'm not a believer in Purdue, despite them last year getting to a final. And Clemson, who I understand has been solid, but am I a big believer in Clemson? I can't say that. I'm going to pick Tennessee because Tennessee, to me, is a mirror image of Houston, but with better scoring. And I understand that when you have a team like Tennessee who has not been successful in the tournament, they're a team that they're almost like the pretty girl with the curl. They look good and they play well at times, but then all of a sudden that's when you think they're going to play well, that's when they all of a sudden going to go belly up. And when you have Rick Barnes, a guy who has not been successful in the tournament dating back to his days when he was a coach of the Texas Longhorns, but you know what? I'm going to put stock in them, and trust me, if they get bounced in the first round here by Wofford, then I'm never going to pick Tennessee again. Because historically, teams like Texas, even Tennessee for that matter, where you think they're going to have a lot of momentum or they're going to finally break through and get to a Final Four, maybe win the whole thing, that's when they just go off into the ether, off into the night, and therefore not go as deep as a lot of people, or like myself, would think as the Volunteers will. So that's what I have coming out of the Midwest. Then in the South, this one I went back and forth quite a bit, and even though I like Auburn, but I couldn't pick them. Based on how they performed here toward the latter part of the season, and even though Auburn, I think they're going to be a tough out here, and why not? Them being a 1 seed overall. But when I take a look at this bracket, Texas A&M, I think they could be that team that could surprise people. Although I'm not a big believer in them, I got to look at Michigan State. Something tells me it's going to be a line for Tom Izzo to get to a Final Four. Is going to win the whole thing. I won't go as far as saying that. But Auburn, I think by them rumbling, bumbling, and stumbling here down the stretch, I don't think that they're going to have any length. Now watch them get to a Final Four, or who knows, get to a national championship and win the whole thing. But with Michigan State, I feel like because it's a line, quarter century later, they have a deep team. Yes, they don't have a big mega star like they had with Mateen Cleaves back in 2000, but I'm going to say Tom Izzo is going to push all the right buttons, get his team there to San Antonio, and that's how I'm going to look at that region. And then let's just cut to the chase. I'm going to pick Florida to get out of the West, and I know it's a loaded region, and we talked about the teams that are there, and I think you're going to see St. John's play Florida. Now, St. John's, whether they play Kansas or Arkansas, will be intriguing because Bill Self, John Calipari, I'm sure they're not going to be expected to get past that second round, whomever comes out of that first game. But I would think Kansas will be a little bit more dangerous than Arkansas because Kansas is going to be that team that, think about it, they were the preseason #1 consensus overall in America, and then they were out of the top 25. And then watch them now, all of a sudden, they'll ignite a fire under their rear ends, maybe beat Arkansas, and then next thing you know, a lot of people are going to think they're going to be counted out here, and they're going to be the why not us candidates to get to a Sweet 16 and watch them beat St. John's. But I think St. John's, with everything that has happened with them this year, winning the Big East regular season, winning the Big East tournament, and now here they are, and hopefully they didn't read the press clippings, but the thing is they have a coach that's going to put them in check. They have a coach that's going to be real with them. So that's why I feel like they're going to have a long-standing run here in this tournament to get to a regional final, but I think it's going to fall short at the hands of the Gators. So therefore, my Final Four, Florida, Michigan State, BYU, Tennessee. So you got a 1, 2 2s, and a 6 seed. Then I have Tennessee playing Florida in your national championship, and then your national champion is Florida. And there's your bracket. Let's see it get blown up to smithereens in the first day. Let's see it get blown up by Saturday. And who knows, maybe it'll still be intact for the most part come Monday when we reconvene and obviously recap it all here on the JAYREELZ podcast. All right, now I'm going to keep the high tops on. I'm going to stick with basketball. And I will say this as I move forward here with the rest of this podcast. The sports world has been rather quiet. There isn't really much to get into, unpack, etc. And in fact, when I talk about the NBA, there hasn't really been much to even discuss. Am I going to get into this guy from San Antonio yesterday, who you know I'm going to butcher his last name, Sandro Mama Luke? I mean, I hate to call him that, and I know that's taking a shot at the poor kid, but let me see if I can pronounce this. Mamadou Kelashvili, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, because I've never seen the guy play in my life. And here he was last night against the Knicks of all teams, scored 34 points in 19 minutes. He's the first player in NBA history to score more than 30 points in less than 20 minutes, and he did it with 7 threes in the process. You would think Tom Thibodeau, by the time he hit his third three and he was in heat check mode, that he would have had a body on him. Wasn't the case, as San Antonio went running away 120 to 105. But what am I going to do? Am I going to talk about that? Or I'm going to talk about Paul George getting shut down for the remainder of the year, which is no shock. We know Embiid's been shut down, and now Paul George, as the first year in Philadelphia between he, Embiid, and even Tyrese Maxey has just been a flat-out disaster. But read between the lines, people. The reason why they're sitting out Paul George, despite the fact of all of his ailments, as well as Embiid for that matter, is because they have a lottery pick that if it's top 6, it's protected. Anything less than that, it's going to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So right now they're in tank mode to know that if they have Paul George play and they're going to be competitive, and despite the fact that they are still on the outside looking in, but maybe by chance, if the Bulls and in this case the Miami Heat still falter, because the Heat right now are just atrocious and they have just been playing horrendous basketball. There's no other way to cut it. But for the Sixers, who right now, all right, now they're 6 games back. I thought they were a little bit closer than that. But they're in tank mode. Their season is done. And we would think that there's no way that they're going to fall outside of that top 6, knowing that they would have to give up that pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And as we all know, the OKC is the youngest team in the sport. And of course now have the best record in the NBA, with the Cavaliers losing 3 straight. And I get that maybe that could be something to discuss, considering that they're now in a 3-game losing streak and Oklahoma City has the best record in the sport, which would mean if Oklahoma City and Cleveland meet in an NBA final if the season ended today, Oklahoma City would have the home court advantage. But there's still 3.5 weeks to go in the season, and although it is a story, but it's nothing that's earth-shattering like, whoa, we got to lead the NBA with the Cavaliers in that 3-game losing streak. And Paul George getting shut down. No, there's nothing to even get into, unpack, etc. And in fact, before we go through the standings and even with the schedule over the next few days, where now the NBA is going to be in the clouds unless something major happens with either an injury or a team that's getting hot, especially out west, as we talked about that logjam 2 through 5, as you know, and the Rockets have been playing lights out as they've won 8 in a row. But for now with the college basketball, they're going to take front and center. They're going to be at the top of the food chain when it comes to the sports landscape over the next few days. And the NBA is pretty much just going to be in hiding, similar to the NHL, which I'll get to next. But there isn't anything else I can really get into when it comes to the association other than what the recent standings are. And everything is pretty much status quo, unless you want to talk about out west, with now the Suns getting the 10th seed. And let's face it, that is not a consolation if you're the Suns, knowing that the Mavericks, as depleted and decimated that they are, that they're going to back into the play-in tournament. And I didn't think that they were going to do so, considering that they've just been an enigma all year long. But right now, although tied with the Mavericks there at 33 and 37, but they do have that 10th spot if the season ended today. And as it is, they're not going to have Klay Thompson play tonight. Oh, he didn't play last night against Indiana, and he has an illness, and that goes along with everybody else that they have injured. And even though Anthony Davis is on the mend, and he could possibly return soon, but Jason Kidd, the head coach, said that, we don't see that happening anytime soon, although he has been recovering nicely. I mean, it's just a mess there in Dallas, as we've talked about here on the podcast over the last few weeks. Just go back in the archives. In fact, I think it was last week I talked about the plight of the Mavericks over the last 5 weeks between the Luka trade, Kyrie's ACL, Anthony Davis playing not even a full game after the trade. I mean, it's just been as bad as it possibly can be for the Mavericks and their fans. I guess the other thing I can really talk about is Celtic City, which I watched the 3rd episode there. And the best way to break down the first 3 episodes, and this is now the first third, you still have 6 more episodes to go. But the first one is going to be on Kuzi, the second one is going to be on Russell, and the third one is going to be on Havlicek. And I can already tell you what the 4th one is going to be, because you already know with the end of the 70s and the drafting of Larry Bird, where for whatever the reason, Red Auerbach had the presence of mind to draft him a year before he came out of college, which obviously the rules were a lot different than they were today, and drafted him knowing that he was going to be the guy coming out of Indiana State. And obviously had the big year where they went 34-0 before losing to, or I think it was 33-0, before losing to Magic Johnson and Michigan State there in the final. And then obviously becoming a Boston Celtic after that, and that's where it's going to be from that point. 70, I believe it's going to be from the 79 season, I want to say through 86, or maybe leading into 86 after 85, where they'll start off 86 and then they're going to talk about Len Bias, etc. Here I am now, the diehard Celtic fan, already breaking down what these future episodes are going to be. Let's just watch them first before we can digest them. But I know for sure you're going to get Bird, you're going to get the run there with the Sixers and the Celtics playing in the 81 Eastern Conference Final. You're going to get the rivalry between them and the Sixers there early on with Julius, and then them bringing on Moses Malone, and then, of course, the 84 series against the Lakers, one of the great series of all time. You're going to get that, but this last episode had Havlicek. It was post-Russell when he retired after being the player coach, and then they struggled there in that 70 into 71 season, and then 72, 73, when Tommy Heinsohn, of course, took over after Bill Russell and them having a run, winning 68 games before losing to the Knicks in a Game 7 in their building. It was the first Game 7 that they lost in Boston Garden ever. And then the following year, beating Kareem there in the 74 final. And then, of course, they chronicle the 76 final with the Gar-Hurd shot in Game 5 before winning in Game 6 in Phoenix. And then toward the end of the decade, where they started to fall off, Havlicek got old. And the Celtics, of course, with their mid-70s heyday with Cowens, and how he was just a guy that was outgoing and was a character. But yes, it's very good. Definitely watch it. I would say even start from the first episode. If you haven't watched it, please do. It's a lot of fun, and certainly as a Celtic fan, it takes me back, obviously, to chronicle their whole history. But with that being said, people, with the conference, again, you have a scenario where 4, 5, 6, as you know, in the East, between Indiana, Milwaukee, and Detroit. That's going to be a battle. The rest of I'm not even going to get into the play-in with the East. When the time comes that we have to discuss it, once the regular season ends, we can talk about those matchups. Because to me, whether it's Atlanta in the 7th seed and they're going to be the home court, or Orlando for that matter, because right now they're 2 games behind them. Bulls and Heat, you can forget about. Those teams are just going to be, and that's what you got there in the East. Yes, you have that cluster, 2 through 5, where Houston has a 1-game lead over the Lakers and Nuggets, and 2 over the Grizzlies, who have now fallen back. And then you have Golden State, who will battle it out with the Clippers and T-Wolves for the 6th seed, because obviously if you're a 6th seed, you're part of the body of the tournament and not part of the play-in. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the Suns are going to back in, as I just talked about. But that's what you have with the NBA. And as far as the schedule here over the next few days, tonight you have 2 games on NBA TV, which you won't see on TNT because you have the coverage there between CBS, TNT, TBS, True TV. Brooklyn, Indiana, and Chicago, Sacramento. Those are your NBA TV games. Please. Tonight, yeah, Bucks and the Lakers. All right, you got that game that if you want to sink your teeth into. Tomorrow, Houston at Miami. Cleveland at Phoenix. Memphis at LA to play the Clippers. That's what you have there. Saturday, Golden State at Atlanta. Bulls in LA to play the Lakers. I mean, this NBA schedule, it is brutal. And then Sunday, no ABC games because you had the tournament. Yeah, you got nothing here. Denver at Houston. Your NBA TV game is Oklahoma City at the Clippers. I mean, this is just bad. So, like I said, NBA is going to be in the clouds just unless something drastic happens over the next few days. But you know I'll be on top of it as the NBA moves it along. And the NHL is not that far off either. I got really nothing to talk about the National Hockey League. Ovechkin has not scored a goal yet, so now let's see what happens after this weekend if he scores a goal over these next few days, because the games that he's played this week, he has not scored. So, as I talked about, is the pressure on Ovechkin now, knowing that the days are being checked off the calendar and the games are being wiped off as they're now getting down to a dozen. Before you know, it'll be 10 games left. And if he hasn't scored a goal, I'm sure, not even in the back of his mind, in the front of his mind, he's going to be pressing. It's going to be a scenario where his teammates are going to try to feed him the score, where obviously if you're going to, instead of have the game come to you, if you're going to go to the game, that's where things will go awry. So, NHL, I don't really have anything. Nashville's going to play Pittsburgh next year in the Global Series in Sweden in mid-November. Is that something that I'm going to pump my chest out for? Absolutely not. I know the Avalanche suffered a big injury to their back line where Josh Manson's going to be out 3 to 4 weeks with an upper body injury. And with Colorado trying to see if they can maybe even get themselves to a point where they have home ice over Dallas in the opening round of the Western Conference playoffs. That's something I'll get to in a minute with the standings. But other than that, you don't really have anything in the National Hockey League. I'm sorry. There isn't any newsworthy items to unpack or discuss, or even with their games for that matter. So that's where the National Hockey League is at this very moment. And in fact, let me just go through the standings and schedule. Now, Toronto, who had beaten the Avalanche last night, now tied with Florida at the top of the Atlantic. And now the Lightning are just 2 points behind them as the Panthers have lost 2 in a row. Now, the Lightning have a game in hand on both teams. So this is going to be interesting because whomever has the 1 seed in the East will play the 1 seed of the wild card, which right now is the Ottawa Senators. So I'm sure for Toronto and Tampa as constituted, because Toronto is in second place despite the fact that both teams are dead even at 41, 24, and 3, Florida and Toronto, that is. So for the Panthers, I'm sure they're going to want to stay in front so they can play the wild card as opposed to having to play Tampa or Toronto in an opening round, which is going to be a rock fight regardless, but they'll want to avoid that. In the Metropolitan, we know about the Capitals and what they've done. They're tied with the Winnipeg Jets at 98 points for the President's Trophy, and we understand that that's a bad sign for any team. Just ask the Rangers and even the Bruins over the last 2 years for that matter, and a lot of other teams in their wake. Then you have Carolina, who have won 7 in a row and played well, and has not played since early on in the week because they won 7 in a row, even when we talked about them on Monday. Then the Devils, where we would see them in a first-round matchup because the Rangers are now 8 points behind the Devils for third place, and you would think that the Rangers are not going to catch them now as they have 13 games left in their season. And then you have Ottawa and Montreal, 77 for Ottawa, 73 for Montreal, who has played well and has come really at the forefront here of this playoff race. But with the Rangers, Islanders, Blue Jackets, Red Wings, and I got to throw in the Bruins, those teams are separated by 4 points behind Montreal for that final playoff spot. Now, if Ottawa continues their separation, 4 points ahead of Montreal, we would think that you're going to have Montreal, Rangers, Islanders, Blue Jackets, Red Wings, and Bruins. 6 teams for the 1 spot, like I mentioned there on Monday. And then in the West, we talked about Dallas, Colorado. Now, Dallas now has a 4-point lead over Colorado as currently constituted. You know, the Jets, obviously, they're going to be the 1 seed in the conference. Then you have Edmonton, who's played well here. They've won 3 in a row and are 2 points behind the Vegas Golden Knights for first place in the Pacific. Edmonton now 3 points behind the Oilers and 5 behind the Golden Knights here as we head down the stretch. Then you have the Wild, who are 2 points behind Colorado in the division. So maybe they could try to get themselves to a 2 seed, but I think maybe they would probably be best to be the 1 seed because then they'll go up against Vegas. Now, do you want to play your division rival? Do you want to play Dallas and avoid that? Interesting concept there, but Minnesota will be entrenched in that 1 seed unless they overtake the Avalanche in the Central. So with Vancouver, who are tied with the Blues there at 75 points, but currently with a game in hand, although the Blues have more wins, but with a game in hand, they have the 2nd seed in the wild card. And unlike the East, but you still have a bit of a jam there where it's Vancouver, St. Louis, Calgary, and the Utah Hockey Club. Those teams, 4 teams separated by 4 points. And Calgary right now, they're in the midst of a Metropolitan trip where they beat the Rangers 2 nights ago at the Garden. They'll play the Devils tonight, and then they'll play the Islanders on Saturday. So for any Calgary Flame fans that are in the tri-state area here, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, if you want to go see the Flames, now's your chance. But I don't know if Vancouver's going to prevail or St. Louis. I haven't really followed those teams closely, not like the East, where obviously I'm top of it more so because the Islanders are in the mix, and I'm a little bit more familiar with those teams as opposed to the teams out West. But you have 4 teams for 1 as opposed to 6 for 1. It's a little bit more crowded there in the East. So that's what you have there with the NHL. I wish I could tell you more. I wish I could share more. And as far as your schedule here over the course of these next few days, tonight you have almost a full slate All but 4 teams playing tonight. Like I mentioned, Calgary, New Jersey. Maple Leafs at the Garden to play the Rangers. Philly, Washington, the Ovechkin watch. Florida at Columbus. Montreal at the Islanders. That's a big game for the Islanders. They have to win that game tonight. Vancouver at St. Louis. There you go. There's a matchup where both teams are going to be jockeying for that 2 seed there in the West. So that's a huge game. Got a lot of big games tonight, and that's good. Tampa at Dallas. Unlike the NBA. NBA, they're from hunger with their schedule. Winnipeg at Edmonton. Boston at Vegas. Tomorrow you only have the 1 game, Columbus at Pittsburgh. And forget about Pittsburgh, they're toast. Then you have Vancouver at New York on Saturday. Vancouver making their way east. I didn't even know that. I guess they're playing the Devils, and I guess the Islanders there on Tuesday or Monday. I got to look at the schedule here. So Saturday, Vancouver at the Rangers, an afternoon tilt. Calgary at the Islanders, as I talked about. Florida at Washington. Tampa, Utah. Colorado, Montreal. Ottawa, New Jersey. Detroit at Vegas. That's a primetime ABC game, okay? Then you have Sunday. No ABC, or TNT games, as you know, because of the tournament. Not really. Tampa at Vegas. Boston at the Kings. Pittsburgh at Florida. Sunday weans off a little bit, but you have great games tonight if you're a hockey fan. A lot to chew on there. Saturday, not so bad. And then Friday and Sunday, not great. So that's what you have there with the NHL as we move it along. As I take off the skates and I'll get into the batter's box and talk some baseball. And with the baseball season starting a week from today, and I understand that it unofficially, or I guess you could say officially began there Tuesday and Wednesday, where the Dodgers played the Cubs out in Tokyo, and the Dodgers beat the Cubs in rather ho-hum fashion, 4-1 and 6-3. Ohtani hitting a home run there yesterday to the thrill of the hometown crowd for the 3-time MVP and the reigning MVP in the National League. And Ohtani did certainly give his fans a show there. But as I thought about the Dodgers this year, and I talked about this on the live stream, every Wednesday a live stream, and wait for some news regarding baseball in a minute when it comes to what I have ahead with the baseball preview. But for the Dodgers, to me, I look at this season for them twofold. Really, it's onefold, but you got to add a little juice because the Dodgers, they're going to win the NL West again. I don't see the Padres. I don't see the Diamondbacks. Maybe if they get bored in the summer and they come back to the pack a little bit to where Arizona and San Diego may have a puncher's chance to get close to a division, but they're not going to win a division. But this is what I'm going to think about the Dodger season as of right this very moment on March 20th, 2025. This is either going to be a juggernaut season to where they're going to maybe not threaten the Seattle Mariner record of 116 and 46, but certainly threaten, I don't want to say threaten, will end up being one of the top records in the sport overall, where they could win, I'll say, between 108 and 112 games. Now remember, the 98 Yankees won 114. So you're going to get to 114. I mean, that's not a monster year. That is a gargantuan year. Something that we haven't seen along the likes. And the crazy thing is that when the 98 Yankees won 114 and there were 48, and we all know one of the greatest teams of all time won the World Series that year, 3 years later, the Seattle Mariners beat them by 2 games in the regular season and then lost into the ALCS to the New York Yankees. So, yes, you're talking about gargantuan year if the Dodgers were to have anything close to what the Yankees had back in 98 or even the Mariners in 2001. I'm not going to go as far as saying that, but I'm going to say that they're going to win anywhere between, and I said 108 and 112 or 108. I'm going to say 106 and 112. Where that lies in between, we'll have to wait and see. And I think they're going to obliterate that number, which was 104.5 by Vegas, the over-unders. And since they already started, I haven't picked them, and nor would I even think so. But you'll get my over-unders next week with the baseball preview, which I'll talk about in a second. But it's either going to be a juggernaut year or they're going to get off to a tremendous start, which they already have, and then they're going to have their lulls. Whether that means injuries, whether that means they're just flat out bored, and whether that means that they may not even take their competition seriously because the rigors of a long season, the dog days of August, where they may be 12 games in front of the Padres or Diamondbacks, Giants, etc., where they're just going to say to themselves, can you just get us to October? And you have to wonder whether or not that's going to be the case. I think you're going to see more of the former than the latter. Now, I don't know what the hunger is going to be like because the team didn't win a World Series, but maybe there's going to be even just more of a team where they know that they are on the verge of doing something, not even just special, but extra special, based on all of the players that they've been able to procure over the last 2 years, and then what they did last year, and knowing that this team, based on their leadership of Dave Roberts, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, to a lesser degree Shohei Ohtani, but I really truly, and they have the right pieces in place. It's a team-oriented, and the parts of their team, although they have the 3 stars, I look at this as being a complete team from top to bottom. Not a complete lineup, but you got guys in the lineup that are dangerous. Tommy Edman, Kike Hernandez, Teoscar Hernandez, Tommy Edman. I mean, guys like that produce and therefore do not have to carry the weight of this team if one of those guys go down, a la last year where you saw Mookie Betts go down the regular season and he didn't skip a beat. Or in the NLCS where Freddie Freeman didn't play in 2 of the games, but who ended up being the NLCS MVP was Tommy Edman. And that's the type of team they have in their rotation and their bullpen. I mean, they're just stocked. That's a combination of stacked and locked. I just made up a word. Or at least a smorgasbord of a word. Anyway, maybe I'm a little bit tired. I'm a little bit goofy at this point. I see this Dodger team having a gargantuan year. And gargantuan means that they're probably going to win in upwards of 108, 110, and maybe 112. They'll probably have their moments this season, just like all baseball teams do, but I think they're going to have pedal to the metal all year, and they're just going to be a juggernaut. That's all there is to it when it comes to the LA Dodgers and the defending champs. Now, there are a couple of things here. I know the Rangers signed Patrick Corbin. No big whoop. They're just another arm to their arsenal there because of, I'm sure, DeGrom and maybe just him as a reinforcement. Veteran, knows how to pitch, although certainly hasn't pitched here in the last few years that he had in the early years, whether it was with Arizona or those early years in Washington. And then the Braves signed Craig Kimbrell to a minor league deal. They figured, hey, what the hell, let's bring him back, see what we have with him. But, Kimbrell is, if in my eyes, he's cooked. And then Jared Jones, a starter in Pittsburgh, a guy that has ability and certainly could be part of a big rotation there in Pittsburgh to go along with Paul Skeens. He's going to miss his next start due to an elbow issue. Hopefully it's nothing serious, that it's something that can be managed, and he'll obviously be a part of the team when they break north after spring training, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But as far as the baseball preview goes, people, all I'll say is this. If you haven't watched any of my live streams here over the last few weeks, you're going to want to watch the next one, because in that next live stream, I'm going to do my 2025 Major League Baseball preview right there. Now, I may transfer it to the podcast there the next day, but as of right now, it is going to be exclusively on YouTube, high noon, Eastern time, Wednesday, full baseball preview. You'll get everything. Breakdown of the divisions, surprises, disappointments, my over-under win totals, my World Series prediction, etc. So you definitely do not want to miss out on that. One more time, Wednesday on YouTube, on my channel at JAYREELZ. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. 2025 Major League Baseball preview, and of course I'll preview my beloved New York Mets in the process. And then lastly, and I'm not even going to go there, people, as I take off the cleats and go talk about the gridiron, I'm not getting into Aaron Rodgers. I'm not going to do that. To me, if he does sign with the Steelers or the Giants, wake me up and I'll talk about it. Because until then, I'm not going to wait for him to decide. Cam Hayward already made his comments about, hey, you want to be a Steeler or not? And yes, to me, I'm with you 100% on that. So all this Rodgers talk, rumors, he may go here, may go there, rumblings, I don't know. Wake me up where he lands, and then we'll unpack. And then the Texans signed 2 of their players, or re-signed. Danielle Hunter, the pass rusher, 1 year, $35 million deal. And now Derek Stingley is now your highest paid corner in the sport, as he received a big deal, more so than J.C. Horn. I know he got 3 for $90, but Stingley's deal is a little bit more than that. So kudos to Derek Stingley for getting the big-time contract, as the Texans keep 2 of their big defensive players intact. And the NFL, you know, it's going to cool off now with the free agency period. I get it with the stupid Rodgers talk, but I'm not even going to go there. And I won't even go there with Rory. I understand he won the TPC in the playoff there. He beat Spawn there in the one hole where he hit balls in the bunker and in the water. So Rory won. And what does that mean for him moving forward, especially with the Masters, I believe 3 weeks from today? I'm not going to say that's going to be any momentum for him to get there and now finally break that 10-year hex that he hasn't been able to win a major tournament. But we'll talk more about the golf as we get closer to the Masters, and the golf season will begin, of course, at that time. But as of right this very second, that will do it, people. Another episode just about in the books. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful toy department that we unpack called sports. And one more time, if you haven't done so, subscribe, rate, review on all podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, the website, JAYREELZ.com, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. Please, people, I implore you to go there, throw me a few stars, write a review, take a screenshot, share it with me, share it with your family, friends, foes, frenemies, the casual, diehard, kook, good, great sports fan in your lives. Trust me, they will be more than happy to digest the content that I provide twice a week, even 3 times a week with the live stream there. Because what other podcast is doing this? I'm talking all sports. You've heard it. College basketball, NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, NFL, even the golf. A little Rory I sprinkled in with some MMA, boxing along the way as we get through the sports calendar here as the tournament is in full bloom. Well, starting today it is. And obviously everything that's going to ensue after that, the baseball season, Masters, the National Championship next month, Stanley Cup playoffs, NBA playoffs, the NFL draft, the horse racing, the Triple Crown, Run for the Roses in early May. You also have the PGA in May. You have the French Open also at the latter part of May, leading into Wimbledon at the end of June into July. The Stanley Cup playoffs, the NBA finals, free agency, NBA draft, NHL draft, hockey. I got it all covered right here. You don't need to go elsewhere to listen to your one-stop shop for sports twice a week, 3 times a week with the live stream. I got you covered. And as an independent podcaster that I am, full-time doing this, as I'm trying to blaze a trail and a path in this industry, right here, people. Support your boy, follow your boy. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion on any of the social media accounts, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number, the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals. Because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do. In the blood, in the DNA, as I like to say, since birth. Where else are you going to get all this, like I mentioned, in a little bit over an hour? Where else are you going to get nothing but unbridled passion, fire, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.